Welcome to the Qasim Rashid Show, a civil rights lawyer here to expose all forms of injustice with a sprinkling of dad jokes in between. Here's your host, Qasim Rashid.
Good morning and peace be upon you this beautiful day, wherever you're tuning in from. My name is Qasim Rashid, and this is the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. Thank you all for tuning in. I appreciate you immensely. Appreciate your texts, your tweets, and yes, even your critiques. I did not intend for that to rhyme, but it did, so we'll take it. I'm grateful that y'all listen to the show and grateful you share it with family and friends. We've got a great show lined up. We're welcoming back somebody I deeply admire, a leader named Krish O'Mara Vignarajah. She is the president and CEO of Global Refuge, formerly Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service, but Global Refuge has been around for 85 years. And we're talking immigration rights and immigration justice today, especially when Donald Trump talking about eating cats and dogs and other psychopathic comments that he refuses to walk back. I think I mentioned in an earlier show that there were more than 30 terrorist threats and bomb threats issued on Springfield, Ohio, after him and JD Vance made these absurd comments. And that's unfortunately where we are right now. So I want to bring her on. She's been on the show before a couple of years ago, and so it's exciting to have her back. But she'll be on to talk about immigration issues. Before we bring her on, though, I want to talk about something really significant. It's the rape and abortion crisis in the United States. It is exponentially worsening, and it is in significant part worsening due to the abortion bans that have been enacted. New study out, published in the American Journal of Medicine, new study out published in the American Journal of Preventative Medicine, and a different study in the Journal of American Medical Association. So two different journals. But this is a horrifying study. Would you believe that since these 14 states have banned abortion, they're documenting that 134 women are impregnated by rape on a daily basis. JAMA, this is the Journal of American Medical Association, reports that an estimated 519,981 survivors of completed rape experienced 64,565 rape-related pregnancies during the 4 to 18 months that bans have been in effect. More than 130 daily. And by the way, guess which states leads them all? Nearly half of all the total number is good old Texas. Texas is number one by far in the 14 states that have banned abortion. Number one in rapes, by the way. And this is especially disgusting and horrifying, given that when asked about rape, Governor Abbott said, quote, "We will eliminate all rapists in Texas." Meanwhile, it's nearly half of the rapes occurring in these 14 states that have banned abortion. And making matters even worse is that several states allow rapists who impregnate a woman to later sue her for child custody rights, especially in these situations. Now it's going to get worse because now they don't have options, right? Women don't have options anymore in these 14 states. They can't actually get an abortion, even if they were impregnated by rape. I can't think of a more horrific and dystopian reality. I could describe North Korea as this, and you'd be like, yeah, that's a dictatorship. That's what I could describe ISIS or the Taliban. You're like, yeah, those are, they're dictators and fascists. That's what they do. This is happening right now in the United States of America. And that's not all. That's part of the horrifying, but that's not the end of the horror. Northwestern University reports another horrifying statistic that maternal mortality has nearly doubled over the last decade and is increasing even more aggressively post-Roe, especially in these red states. Their study, published in the American Journal of Preventative Medicine, found that between 2014 and 2021, the overall maternal mortality rate in the United States nearly doubled from 16.5 to 31.8, with the largest increase occurring in the last 2 or 3 years post-Roe. Another study by the Commonwealth Fund found a similar and equally horrifying data set, and added the massive racial impact of these abortion bans. And I'm quoting, they said, "We found that maternal deaths were 62% higher in 2020 in abortion restriction states than in abortion access states." 62% higher. Notably, across the 3 years presented, the maternal mortality rate was increasing nearly twice as fast in states with abortion restrictions. Maternal deaths are high in the US relative to other high-income countries, and there are significant inequities by race and ethnicity. In addition, for every major racial or ethnic group, maternal death rates are higher in abortion restriction states compared to abortion access states, including 20% higher among non-Hispanic Black people, 33% higher among non-Hispanic white people, and 31% higher among Hispanic people. So we're dealing with a dual crisis, not just of a rapidly increasing maternal mortality rate, but if you're Black or Latino, it's another 30% higher than it already was. And it gets even worse. It gets even worse. A Johns Hopkins study found that in 2022, after Texas enacted its abortion ban, Senate Bill 8, it led to 216 additional infant deaths. That's 216 families whose child died due to this ban. And by the way, this ban was despite Texas already suffering the worst rate of infant mortality in the developed world. Not just in the United States, but in the entire developed world. And Texas is not alone. GOP-led states that ban abortion and reproductive health access top the list in infant mortality. Like, it's not even close how much more likely it is to have your child die. You're talking a 200 to 300% likelihood of your child dying in these red states than in blue states. Yeah, you have states that have, a death rate of 3 per 100,000. And then you have states where it is something like 9 per 100,000. Right? Mississippi, for example, Louisiana, Texas is 7 per 100,000. It's absolutely mortifying how the so-called pro-life party is actively killing women, actively killing children, and meanwhile, literally empowering rapists. And the horrific and the painful deaths of Black women like Amber Thurman, these were not inevitable. They were the result of deliberate policy choices. Deliberate policy choices by these extremist MAGA Republicans who care more about controlling women than they do about actually listening to healthcare professionals and actually listening to medical science. That Northwestern University study that I cited earlier, they also pointed out that maternal mortality is largely preventable. This is not my paraphrasing, this is a quote, that maternal mortality, maternal deaths are largely preventable. That means that the vast majority of maternal deaths pre-repeal of Roe and virtually all maternal deaths post-Roe were preventable. But these horrific anti-science, anti-family, pro-fascist GOP policies ensured and expedited these preventable deaths. Every medical and academic institution out there is reporting that banning abortion is killing women. It's killing babies. It's empowering rapists. Yet the GOP is doubling down at every single opportunity. It's no wonder that more than 70% of Americans across the political spectrum want to protect reproductive health access. It's no wonder that people recognize, and what Tim Walz says all the time, that you don't have to agree with abortion to mind your own damn business and let people live their lives and not interfere with their private healthcare decisions. Because it's this whole interference that's leading to this spike in maternal and infant deaths. How can you be pro-life and then pass policies that are literally killing women and children? It's psychopathic and sociopathic behavior. And the fact is that for these Republicans, it was never about life. It was always about control of women. And I've said this before, if you really want to decrease abortion rates, then you do it a common sense way. And what is that common sense way? You ensure women have guaranteed universal health care access. You ensure you provide prenatal care. You ensure that that women have economic security and financial security, that they have housing security, that they have food security. You ensure that women have childcare, that childcare while they work isn't astronomically expensive, that children, the teenagers, to be more specific, have comprehensive sex education classes so they understand how their own bodies work. The absence only, don't teach children about their own bodies is bizarre behavior that we know results in an increase in teen pregnancies. These are all proven models to decrease abortion rates that don't require killing women and killing babies to prove your point. All of these not only decrease abortion rates, but they increase a healthy society. They result in economic prosperity. They're common sense. But for Republicans, it was never about life. It was always about control of women. And in reality, this is fascism and has the potential to devastate our entire society if not stopped on November 5th. All right, that was my intro rant for the day. In the outro, I've got another rant that we'll talk about, but I'm excited to go to break and then bring on Krish O'Mara Vignarajah. As I mentioned, she is the president and CEO of Global Refuge, one of the nation's leading immigration rights organizations. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. We'll be right back with Krish O'Mara Vignarajah after this break. Welcome back. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. I'm extraordinarily excited to bring back someone I deeply admire. Krish O'Mara Vignarajah is the president and CEO of Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service. She previously served in the Obama White House as policy director for First Lady Michelle Obama and at the State Department as senior advisor under both Secretary Clinton and Secretary of State John Kerry. Brings a brilliant background on a number of issues, particularly on immigration, and I'm grateful to have her on to talk about that today. Krish, it's been far too long. Great to have you back on the show.
Yeah, lots happened. But Qasim, I'm really grateful for you having me on. Appreciate it.
Definitely. I mean, I think one thing my audience knows is that I aspire to bring on leaders who are walking the walk and doing the work on the ground, because at the end of the day, these are the kinds of voices we need to elevate, especially if we want to build a more compassionate and just future. And you lead by example there. So let's kind of dive into this. I was shocked, maybe that's the wrong word. I was disappointed as I'm seeing the latest polling. For the first time since 2001, in a post 9/11 America, we have 55% of all Americans who want to curb immigration. Only 41% believe we need to increase immigration levels. This has been a rising trend. Back in May of 2020, we had only about 30% that wanted to see a decrease of immigration, and now this shot up to 55%. What do you attribute that to? What's causing that, and how do we respond to this?
Yeah, it's such an important question because this is a dynamic that has been years in the making. When you have essentially a one-sided narrative that is kind of built more on fiction than fact, when you have politicians who have decided that immigration is the wedge issue on which they can win elections, what you will see is these racist, xenophobic tropes, everything from immigrants are eating your pets to they are stealing your jobs. And I think it's troubling because, of course, when one party has decided to make this a divisive issue and the other side has decided this is their Achilles heel and they don't want to talk about it, then Americans are, of course, going to not understand that we have an aging population, that we have the lowest birth rate since the census has been tracking this issue. And the further and further we get away from our history, it's easier to adopt this them versus us narrative. And that's what you're seeing in the polling.
Somebody, a friend of mine who's also an immigrant, like you and I are, said that they had just moved to the US a couple of years ago. And they said that after living here a couple of years, I realized that this country has two parties. One is evil and the other is spineless. And I feel like that's kind of what gets us into this mess in the first place. But what's really flabbergasting to me is you go back and you listen to the presidential debates between George Bush Sr. and Ronald Reagan back in 1980. And they're arguing about how we can be more compassionate towards immigrants and immigration. Ronald Reagan talks about an open border policy that allows immigrants to come in for work visas and head back home in the off season on their own and come back and forth. And George Bush brags about how there's an immigrant in his family. How did we go from that in 1980 to now, 40, 45 years later, eating dogs and cats? What happened in our politics that we decided that was going to be the wedge issue?
Yeah, it's a question that I can't tell you I have the complete answer to. I certainly think that time has played a part where with each generation that is, one more step removed, perhaps it is easier to forget that we are a nation of immigrants. I think part of it is also that we've gone from one extreme to another, so we went
Yeah.
from the family separation crisis where thankfully and rightfully people were up in arms to now having this dynamic where maybe we saw a policy at the southern border and a crisis. I think the Biden administration early on said, no, there's no crisis, nothing's happening, and I think as a result they lost some credibility. As you said, I think both parties are at fault. The fact that we haven't reformed this system for 3 decades has meant that so many of the systems that used to work, right, where we had more legal, orderly pathways, they're backlogged, they're dysfunctional. And so I think people don't understand why you're seeing so many come to the southern border. That maybe a family that would have been reunified through a proper system 2 decades ago, they are now desperate because their application's been sitting languishing for literally years, and as a result they undertake a circuitous route of coming through Mexico. And so there's obviously a backstory here, and I just think that we as Americans have to understand that for our system to work, for us to indulge in the cheap milk that we receive, the care for our kids and our parents, that system hinges on immigration.
Right.
And so I think most Americans are where we are, which is like, let's figure out a system. It's not an open border and it's not a completely closed border. It's somewhere in between. But I think you're exactly right that where we used to have responsible political leaders, we now have fear-mongering politicians, and we're now in this hole. We've got to figure out a way to dig out of it, but
I,
I'm
I
nervous.
agree. And really, I mean, I think you said it beautifully, Krish. I mean, there's every angle you look at, whether it's economics, whether it is healthcare, whether it is wages, whether it is, job security, whether it's housing, in public safety, in every single scenario, adding immigrants to the equation improves that's what the data is telling us. Whether it's, the left-leaning think tanks like the Brennan Center or the right-leaning think tanks like Cato, they all agree on these principles remarkably. And this is shocking given how divisive our country is right now, that if you want to increase wages for the overall population of US citizens, add immigrants to the mix. They will drive up wages. If you want to drive down prices at the grocery market, add immigrants. They will help drive down prices. I mean, it's fascinating to me that these common sense, factual elements are not being used by Democrats. And I say this as someone who's run for Congress as a Democrat, that these are not opinions, these are facts. And rather than leaning into these facts, we cede control. I want to get your thoughts on this because this was extremely disappointing to me about President Biden. When he ran in 2020, he rightfully and courageously and compassionately slammed Trump for restricting asylum and talked about how no president in history has ever done this and that it's a cruel policy and he would never do it. And now he's adopting essentially the exact same policy. Not really a specific question, but just someone who lives and breathes this stuff every day. What does that mean to you? How do you respond to that? How do you address that?
Yeah, I think certainly to your point just now, there has definitely been a ceding of ground. Even in the Senate bipartisan bill, you would have never thought Democrats would have embraced that in the way that they did. But I do think that it shows that there has been such a significant shift against immigration, that kind of there is a new center of where many of these compromise bills are going to be. But I also think part of why we've seen it is because, I mean, look, there was a surge at our southern border, right? And I
Yeah.
think Americans understandably looked at this and said, kind of what's going on here, right? Like who's, we are a nation of immigrants. We're also a nation of laws. And so I think that's where we need to see more political leaders say, look, this is problematic and we need to fix this. But the solution cannot be mass deportations. And that seems to be the narrative we have right now. I think the other part of it is talking about, like, as you just said, that a lot of the problems we face, immigration is going to be a part of the solution. I think it's also equally important to say a lot of the problems that Americans are experiencing right now, like the opioid epidemic or affordable housing, it is so easy to scapegoat and put the blame on the backs of people who they can't vote, right? Or they don't have a platform to defend themselves. And what it means is that the people who are hurt are actually Americans, right? Because we do have an opioid epidemic, but it is being fueled not by asylum seekers coming across the border. It's being fueled by China creating it and U.S. citizens smuggling it for the consumption of U.S. citizens across commercial ports of entry. So yes, we need to fix that problem, but the first stage of that is accepting kind of the source of the problem as opposed to blaming it on immigrants. Likewise, I'll just say affordable housing, right? Like it is a crisis, and the root cause, I would say, is that the people who own the homes are no longer the people who inhabit them. And that's a dynamic of, private equity firms coming in. And instead of saying like, look, like JD Vance knows this world, right? He came from this world, rather than saying there is a broader dynamic of who is buying up these homes and then escalating the rent prices. It's ridiculous for it to be blamed on immigrants, but because we have embraced this mentality of scarcity, Americans are accepting it.
If you're just tuning in, we're speaking with Krish O'Mara Vignarajah, who is the president and CEO of Global Refuge. Earlier, I introduced her under the previous organizational name, Lutheran Immigration Refugee Service, but Global Refuge is the name of the organization. And just to co-sign that point, I mean, it's almost laughable, right? That the narrative is these immigrants, these asylum seekers are coming in with no money, with no prospects, but somehow they're spending $400,000 cash and buying these homes, and therefore you can't get a house. Like it's just on its own face value, it makes no sense. And you're right. I mean, the private equity industry is not just decimating our housing; it's decimating every aspect. I mean, I've got friends who are physicians, as I'm sure you do as well. And private equity is buying up practice after practice after practice, and we're seeing the quality of care go down in that space. We're seeing private equity purchase convenience stores and monopolize basic humanitarian needs that people need right now. And I was looking up the data on the fentanyl crisis that you're citing earlier. According to Border Patrol, more than 80% is at the actual ports of entry, and more than 90% are by U.S. citizens. So this is not an immigration crisis; it's a U.S. citizen crisis. And you look at violent crime. Not only do citizens have higher rates of crime and violent crime than undocumented immigrants or documented immigrants, but it's actually we're exporting crime. Our gun crisis is being exported to Mexico and South and Central America. But let's talk about Global Refuge, because I think in a dark world, the work that you're doing at Global Refuge is a bright light, and it's pushing back against the misinformation, against the vitriol, and it's bringing about meaningful solutions. What's the superhero origin story of Global Refuge, and what's the ultimate mission and vision of what you're trying to accomplish?
Really appreciate that question, especially this year as we celebrate our 85th anniversary.
Amazing.
So yeah, we were founded in 1939, and the mission has always been to walk alongside newcomers, integrate them into communities, help them reach self-sufficiency as they rebuild their lives here in America. We are the largest faith-based nonprofit. I highlight that because I think it is really important for us as a country to appreciate that so much of this work has historically been done by faith communities, because for so many religions, welcoming the stranger has been, a core pillar. And I think that it is kind of a particular area of expertise we have is care of unaccompanied kids. During the family separation crisis, we were one of 2 organizations that the government turned to reunify kids with their parents. And we're one of the 2 refugee resettlement agencies that resettles unaccompanied refugee minors. And so I think that really is at the heart of our work, which is, for me personally, I know you obviously have immigrant roots as well. I have a 1-year-old and a 7-year-old girls, and I know that their lives will be easier because my parents' lives were hard. And to me, that is really the American dream. It's very much at the heart of what we do at Global Refuge. And for me, I hope I can always say that, to your point about how there are some dark days that we've experienced in the recent past. I don't take for granted that this is the greatest nation in the world. And I know so much of what my parents sacrificed, what our clients' parents do, which is what any parent would do, which is flee, war conditions to give a better life to their kids. And that, I think, is really at the heart of what Global Refuge is focused on.
Absolutely. And for those who are not familiar with Global Refuge, it's an organization I highly encourage you to look into, get involved and contribute to. What's the long-term vision look like, especially, depending on which direction this election goes on November 5th, we're seeing 2 very different narratives emerging. How do you plan for that? What are we looking at? I mean, I'm horrified just thinking about the concept of deploying the military and the National Guard to just go among the streets, rounding up random people who don't look American, whatever that phrase even means. What should we be thinking about? How can folks make sure they're safe and secure?
Yeah, the long-term vision is that we stay true to our roots. And frankly, our comparative advantage today is that, by contrast to a country like China or Russia, where these nations like us are facing a demographic crisis, but yet we are a country where people still risk their lives to make it to safety on our soil, and that's a superpower. And I think right now we take that for granted. Somehow this comparative advantage has been torpedoed and suggested to be a weakness. And I think that's what people face in terms of the election. Will we continue to be a welcoming country, or will we allow for politicians who've adopted these kind of extreme, hardline, anti-immigration platforms to take power? And I think that's what I would urge your viewers to look into, which is, what does it mean to continue to be welcoming? What does it mean to forge compromise? What does mass deportation look like? How would you implement policies like that? And so I think we have an opportunity to just pick the path of the future we want for our kids.
Beautifully said. And I neglected to ask you earlier, and I probably should have, and I think our viewers should know, you have a pretty powerful story of coming to the United States, you and your family. And I think it informs a lot of the compassion and commitment to justice that you have right now in the work that you do. If you feel comfortable, I'd love for you to kind of share your origin story so people understand that for you, this is not just a vocation, it's a deep calling, reflective of the values that you were raised with.
Oh, I appreciate the question. Yeah, I wish I could take any credit, but of course I was 9 months old when we came here, and I'm just grateful to 2 courageous parents who did something I don't know I would be able to do. So I was born in Sri Lanka in 1979. My parents were part of the ethnic and religious minority there. And as the country was on the brink of civil war, my parents really sought refuge in any country that would receive them. The only country that would at the time was actually Nigeria, because like we're experiencing today, they were experiencing a teacher shortage. And so they were actually aggressively recruiting, had sent people to Sri Lanka. My parents got jobs. And so we actually had our plane tickets bought, our bags were packed, and we were ready to move to Nigeria, to northern Nigeria. So roughly the region where Boko Haram would kidnap 276 girls just for going to school. When my uncle, who speaking of shortages, had moved to rural Texas because they were, like we are today, experiencing doctor shortages. He had moved there as a neurosurgeon to practice. You could say it was the heyday of immigration, so he had sponsored his brothers and sisters, knowing that they needed to get out of the country. And what we thought was a visa application that had just fallen through the cracks, it was processed just in the nick of time. And so instead of moving to Nigeria, we came to the US. And we moved to Baltimore because my dad got a job in the Baltimore City public school system. He finally retired at the age of 80 several years ago when my older daughter was born. I promised him that I would give him a full-time job, so he felt like he wouldn't be bored. She was born in June. That September, I actually was very worried that he would come out of retirement because she was a handful. And teaching in the Baltimore City school system may have been easier than taking care of her. But alas, I am really grateful that I have parents who are still very involved in their grandkids' care. It allows me to do the work I do as president and CEO of Global Refuge. But I'm incredibly grateful because it was that warm welcome that we got that allowed me to go on to, Yale and Oxford and the White House, and this role where I hope I'm able to kind of pay it forward to the newest generation of immigrants.
Beautiful. Absolutely. And I think you kind of exemplify that this is the intent of immigrants, whatever part of the world they come from. This is the intent of immigrants coming to the United States. And it's okay to be critical of our policy. I'm reminded of James Baldwin's beautiful quote about this, that I love America more than any country on earth, and that's why I insist on the right to criticize her perpetually. That's how we form a more perfect union, the literal founding words of our founding documents. And Krish, I think your story exemplifies that. And for those just tuning in, we're speaking with Krish O'Mara Vignarajah, who is the president and CEO of Global Refuge, one of the nation's oldest faith-based immigration rights organizations. So what's next? We're coming up to this pivotal election, November 5th. What can folks do to get involved with the work you're doing? How can they play a more active role? It's one of the common questions I get from folks is, look, I'm not, the CEO of a major organization. I'm not a multimillionaire. I don't have these big connections, but I want to do my part to make this country better, to be more supportive of immigrants, to have a sense of compassion. What can the ordinary person out there do to play a positive role in how we treat immigrants going forward?
It's such a critical question because the truth is that the role that your listeners can play is frankly, in many ways more powerful than what I can do. The truth is that especially right now, when I talk about immigration, being an immigrant myself, leading an immigration organization, my voice, for better or worse, is discounted, right? Whereas for people to look into their own origin story, because unless you're part of the indigenous community or your family was forced through slavery to come to this country, someone in your family made an intentional decision to come to this country. And truly, I thank God for that. And so I think your ability to be an ambassador for this issue is invaluable. If you want to get more involved, you can go to globalrefuge.org. We put action alerts out there. We know that the immigration system is broken. It isn't operating the way it should be. And so each of us needs to play our part to advocate for change. And I think that there's a real opportunity, especially once we get out of election season, and just the silliness that is going to be, the lead up. I think there is a real opportunity for us to have serious conversations to say, look, it's broken. How do we fix it? For folks to get involved, I would just say, please go to globalrefuge.org and we'd love to connect.
Brilliant. And actually, that was going to be my last question before we wrap up. Going to globalrefuge.org, how can folks support you? Are you on social media? I know you are, but I'm asking the questions.
Yeah.
You can how can folks get involved with you and get engaged with you?
Qasim, I really appreciate that question. So I'm actively on social media. My handle is at Krish Vignarajah. So that's KRISH, V as in Victor, IGNARAJAH. And I love hearing from people. We put out these disinformation campaigns so that we can fight fiction with fact. And we really do want to make sure people understand, to your point earlier, we need to ground these conversations that can be really heated and emotional in facts. We can disagree, but I just want us to at least have a common understanding of the facts before we get into those debates. And so I really try to inform these discussions. So if you're interested in learning more, please check me out at Krish Vignarajah.
Krish, thank you so much for being with us today. Let's hope we can have you back on soon. In fact, let's make sure we have you back on soon. I think I checked, and the last time we had you on was over 2 years ago, so we can't let that happen again.
I appreciate that, and hopefully we can have a maybe a less doomsday conversation about our kids or something. The next conversation.
Yes. We let's count on it. Thank you so much for being with us. That was Krish O'Mara Vignarajah, President and CEO of Global Refuge, a brilliant organization. Check them out at globalrefuge.org. You are listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. That was Krish O'Mara Vignarajah, President and CEO of Global Refuge, one of the nation's leading faith-based immigration rights organizations. Check them out at globalrefuge.org. Krish is someone I've known for several years. She does phenomenal, inspiring work, and it's exciting to support leaders like her. This is how we build a better and more compassionate future. So if you're looking to get into immigration rights, especially, check out globalrefuge.org and throw them a few bucks. But more importantly, stay engaged, sign up for the newsletter, and listen to their calls to action, because that's how we get involved at the local, state, and federal level. I want to close out the show in these last 14-ish minutes that we have and address this critical crisis of Gaza and Israel and Palestine. Recent revelations from Haaretz, Israel's longest-running newspaper, have confirmed a deeply disturbing reality. The Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, has actively blocked every potential hostage release deal since October 7th, 2023. And while the public narrative continues to ask why Hamas refuses to agree to such deals, the more pressing question really should be is why Netanyahu himself has repeatedly obstructed these opportunities, and why the West continues to arm him. And my argument is that the answers to these questions speak to a much darker truth. I'm not sure how many of my listeners saw this report published in CNN just a couple of days ago. It's an absolutely mortifying report where they interview a former Israeli soldier, or a current Israeli soldier, who's suffering PTSD, and how he's struggling with trauma and suicide. And why? Because he talks about his experience in Gaza. And this part, just my jaw dropped at this part, when he talked about how they were killing Palestinians. He says that he was deployed to Gaza on October 8th of last year and tasked with driving a D9 bulldozer, a 62-ton armored vehicle that can withstand bullets and explosives. He says that he was a civilian for most of his life, working as a manager at a construction company. And then after witnessing the massacres committed by Hamas, he felt he needed to fight. He spent 186 days in the enclave until he sustained injuries to his knee, followed by hearing damage. And he was pulled out of Gaza for treatment. He was diagnosed with PTSD, and ultimately he died by suicide. And his story is one of many which talks about what these folks did with these bulldozers. And this part, content warning, is gruesome, it's mortifying. He says that he spoke out publicly about the psychological trauma he endured by the Israeli troops in Gaza. First of all, it's centering the troops as the victims here. And it says that in his testimony, he said that on many occasions, soldiers had to, quote, run over terrorists dead and alive in the hundreds. Everything sports out. He says he can no longer eat meat because it reminds him of the gruesome scenes he witnessed from his bulldozer, and he struggles to sleep at night at the sound of explosions ringing in his head. When you see a lot of meat outside and blood, both ours and theirs, then it really affects what you eat, referring to the bodies as meat. Help me understand how this person knows every person he ran over is a magical terrorist. He doesn't. He knows that he ran over innocent people. And if it was a terrorist who was incapacitated and unable to move, running them over and killing them is a war crime. He's confessing to war crimes. In mainstream legacy media, he's just confessing and there's no accountability. Help me understand this. This is sociopathic behavior. He's confessing that they ran over people who are alive and that they're doing this right now and their blood and guts squirted out. To be clear, if someone is dead and you run them over, the blood doesn't squirt out because there's no blood flowing. That happens when a person's alive. And here he's confessing in public to the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, on legacy media, and there's no accountability to it whatsoever. This is where we are right now. This is why every person with a sense of morality should be outraged that Biden continues to arm this. If you have a sense of human decency, you should be outraged that our government, our tax dollars are paying for this. A 62-ton armored vehicle to run over innocent civilians. Haaretz and the Jewish Independent both cite the report by Channel 12 News, Yaron Abraham, who says that, and now we're getting back to Netanyahu blocking the hostage release deals. He says that since the hostage release ceasefire deal in November, Israel's negotiation team has been on a futile mission to secure another deal to bring home more hostages. While Netanyahu did, quote, everything in his power to make sure they are not successful, end quote. He continues that Netanyahu walked back several promises he made, including an agreement to end the war, and invented new non-starters that were previously never mentioned that blocked a deal. He also repeatedly prevented negotiators from traveling to ceasefire talks or greatly limited their negotiation powers when they are allowed to go, end quote. But perhaps even more concerning to me is that this is not a recent development. Haaretz reported way back in March of 2024 that Netanyahu's own generals are angry with him for, quote, sabotaging a hostage deal. In fact, the families of the hostages themselves condemn Netanyahu, and they call him Mr. Death. The families of the hostages call Netanyahu Mr. Death. This is not Hamas calling him Mr. Death. It's not Palestinians calling him Mr. Death. It's not people on the left in America calling him Mr. Death. These are the hostage families themselves calling Netanyahu Mr. Death, stating that he is the biggest obstruction to a ceasefire and to a hostage release deal. Not Hamas, Netanyahu. They said that they learned that a full hostage deal was on the table in October of 2023, and Netanyahu rejected it. Simultaneously, in addition to these atrocities, Netanyahu has made it clear that his intention is to annex Gaza, further deepening the catastrophe that has already gripped the Palestinian territory. And look, this is not a random byproduct of war. It's not. It's a deliberate strategy to seize land that does not belong to Israel under international law. It is no different in practical effect than Putin annexing Crimea or part of the Ukraine. None. It's the exact same thing. Taking land by force that doesn't belong to you is a violation of international law, and that is what Netanyahu is doing with Gaza right now. The Israeli military continues to bombard Gaza, killing civilians indiscriminately. The Jabalia refugee camp is under bombardment right now. How can anyone deny that this is a perpetuation of genocide? And indeed, the most difficult element to prove when assessing genocide is intent. It's a matter of intent. But what other conclusion can be drawn when Netanyahu blocks hostage deals, blocks aid, prolongs the conflict, his own generals condemn him, hostage families condemn him, the UN, the ICJ, the ICC all condemn him, and now he openly plans to annex Gaza while it is in complete ruins. This is not accidental. This is calculated. This is intentional. You don't accidentally do any of this stuff. And I'm a human rights lawyer, but it does not take an international human rights lawyer to see the intent behind this cruelty. One of the most effective propaganda claims that Netanyahu has disseminated is that he would stop bombing Gaza if only Hamas would accept releasing all the hostages. But the receipts show that he's the one refusing to accept a deal that releases the hostages. He is the main culprit behind preventing a hostage deal, even as he rejected UN Security Council Resolution 2735. And to be clear, UN Security Council Resolution 2735 is a binding UN resolution based on Israel's own hostage release proposal. Israel said, these are the terms we want. The US said, great, we will push through a binding UN resolution on these terms exactly. And they did that exactly. And then Netanyahu rejected it once it passed because Hamas accepted it. He rejected his own deal that the US pushed through the UN Security Council, and he rejected it because Hamas accepted it. And now Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar is dead, killed by the Israeli military. Harris has reissued her calls for an end to the siege in Gaza. And I would love nothing more than to be proven wrong, but I am betting that Netanyahu will not stop his siege. And so far, it's been nearly a week since Sinwar has been killed, and Netanyahu has continued to bomb northern Gaza. He's continued his siege on Gaza. This is genocide, guys. This is genocide. It cannot become more clear than this. He is showing his intent. He is showing that he has no interest in peace. You know, Article 2 of the United Nations Genocide Convention in December of 1948, which was created post-Holocaust, it came into effect in January of 1951. Article 2 of the convention defines genocide as any of the following acts committed with the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group as such. Any of the following acts committed with the intent constitutes genocide. 1, killing members of a national, ethnic, or racial or religious group. Causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. Deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. Imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, and forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. The convention also imposes a general duty on states that are signatories to prevent and to punish genocide. And I know folks have said, well, that's just the UN definition of genocide. The UN clearly has an anti-Israel, anti-Semitic bias. And to that, I point out two things. One, the UN is who created Israel. The UN vote is how Israel was created in 1948. If you're going to accept that UN resolution creating Israel, then how are you going to suddenly reject UN resolutions that are critical of Israel? You can't have it both ways. Either you accept the UN or you don't. You're saying you don't accept the UN, then you're saying that you don't accept the creation of the state of Israel. If you're saying you accept the UN creating Israel, then you have to accept that you abide by the UN. It's simple as that. And two, the United Nations Genocide Convention, how was it adopted? Well, it was adopted because a man named Raphael Lemkin coined the term genocide in 1943. Lemkin witnessed the horrors of the Holocaust, and then he campaigned to have genocide recognized as a crime under international law. Due to his work and advocacy, the United Nations adopted the Genocide Convention. Due to Raphael Lemkin. Now, who was Raphael Lemkin? Raphael Lemkin was a Jewish Polish lawyer. He witnessed the horrors of the Holocaust because every member of his family except his brother was killed in the Holocaust. And based on his experience in the Holocaust, based on watching his family be killed in the Holocaust, he coined the term genocide, and he lobbied to have the United Nations adopt the Genocide Convention, which they did in December 1948 and came into effect in January of 1951. And what I described earlier as a definition of genocide is a definition coined by a Jewish Polish lawyer who defied the odds and survived the Holocaust. This man's heroism, this man's courage, this man's conviction is why we have a definition of genocide today. And so to claim that it's inappropriate to apply it to what Netanyahu is doing because it's anti-Semitic makes no sense whatsoever. It was literally a Jewish Polish lawyer who survived the Holocaust, who said, here is how we define genocide. And when you look at intent, we look at Netanyahu talking about Palestinians being human animals. Look at Gallant, the defense minister of Israel, saying there are no civilians in Gaza. They are all guilty. This is intent. This is collective punishment. These are war crimes. And we need to take it seriously, my friends, because if it's happening there, it can happen over here under the same jurisdiction. Even if you don't care, even if you're so callous that you don't care about Palestinians, one, God help you. Two, you're also being foolish if you don't think it can happen over here as well, which is why it is critical, absolutely critical, we do not sit silent and we raise our voices loudly. Deep breath. Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to follow us on social media at Qasim Rashid across all platforms. We will continue to advance a show that builds on compassion and justice. Be sure to tune in next week, same time, same place here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. If you're listening on Substack, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Thank you for your support. Continue speaking truth to power. Until next week, peace.